of scholarship in 1930 than it is today. The analytical tools available to economists were far fewer and very unsophisticated compared to today. But even then, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were something economists could agree on. Over 1,000 economists signed a petition to President Herbert Hoover, Republican President Herbert Hoover, asking him to veto the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. America's most famous industrialist at the time, Henry Ford, knew it would be a disaster for business and a disaster for the economy. He went to the White House to try to convince the Republican President Herbert Hoover to veto the tariff bill written by Republican Senator Reed Smoot and Republican Congressman Willis Hawley and passed with overwhelming Republican support in the House and the Senate. Henry Ford called the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, quote, an economic stupidity. J.P. Morgan's chief executive said, quote, I almost went down on my knees to beg Herbert Hoover to veto the asinine Smoot-Hawley tariff. Herbert Hoover, a successful businessman in his own right, thought he knew better. And he signed these Smoot-Hawley tariffs into law. And in the next election, Herbert Hoover lost his re-election campaign for the presidency to the governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In that same election in 1932, when voters were living with the disaster of Reed Smoot's bright idea and Willis Hawley's eager support of that idea, Senator Smoot and Congressman Hawley lost their re-election campaigns. There is universal agreement among economists that Smoot-Hawley tariffs made the Great Depression even worse. Those tariffs did not protect American jobs. They killed American jobs. And it meant that the portrait of Willis Hawley hanging in the offices of the House Ways and Means Committee, along with the portraits of all the other chairmen of that committee, and the portrait of Reed Smoot hanging in the offices of the Senate Finance Committee, along with the portraits of all the other chairmen of that committee, it meant that those portraits hang forever in disgrace and infamy. Smoot and Hawley hurt America more than any other chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee in history. They destroyed lives. People lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their hope because of what Senator Smoot and Congressman Hawley did when they did not have any idea what they were doing, just like Donald Trump. And so when you hear economists now saying Donald Trump's idea about tariffs is even worse than Smoot and Hawley, you have to know something about Smoot and Hawley to really understand just how bad Donald Trump's idea is. Henry Ford would have to reach for a new rhetorical extreme to describe it, because Henry Ford's phrase, an economic stupidity, would feel inadequate. Last week, Donald Trump said he wants to eliminate the tax code, eliminate the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, and replace the income tax with nothing but tariffs. Donald Trump wants to eliminate the income tax, replace the revenue to the government with nothing but tariffs, the biggest tariffs in American history. CNBC reports Donald Trump on Thursday brought up the idea of imposing an all-tariff policy that would ultimately enable the U.S. to get rid of the income tax, sources in a private meeting with the Republican presidential candidate told CNBC. Every Trump supporter who attends Trump's rallies believes Donald Trump's big lie when he says this.
Nobody ever took money out of China like me. I took hundreds of billions of dollars out in the form of tariffs and taxes.
Nope, he didn't take a penny from China, not one penny. It is reasonable to assume that most Trump voters believe that China pays the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, because Donald Trump says that China pays the tariffs. But in high school, they should have learned, and maybe before high school for a lot of students, they should have learned that tariffs are paid by the people in the country that imposes the tariffs. That's how tariffs work. You don't have to take advanced placement American history in high school to learn about tariffs, including these Smoot-Hawley tariffs. Donald Trump knows that China does not pay the tariffs that he imposed. He knows that American consumers pay those tariffs. They function as sales taxes on American consumers. And Donald Trump is consciously lying when he says that to his audience about China paying the tariffs. And because American consumers pay the tariffs, in effect, as sales taxes, an increase in tariffs means an increase in prices through, in effect, sales taxes, which is the very definition of inflation, that increase in prices that Donald Trump's tariffs would bring about. Donald Trump is proposing the single most inflationary idea of our lifetimes. And that is just one aspect of the pain Donald Trump would inflict with this idea, which Harvard economist Lawrence Summers, who was the first to raise concerns about possible inflation during the COVID-19 pandemic, says is the worst economic policy proposal in U.S. history. In U.S. history. And Larry Summers knows economic U.S. history. And that means that Donald Trump's idea is worse than Smoot-Hawley, much worse.
Replacing the income tax with revenue with tariff would be the worst macroeconomic policy proposal in U.S. history. It, of course, burdens the middle class and the poor who purchase goods that exist on international markets. So it's regressive, as many economic commentators have suggested. But that is actually the least of it. Think about it this way. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which did enormous damage, some people would say made the Depression great, were 0.6% of GDP. If you replaced half of income tax revenues, not all like he talked about, if you replaced half of income tax revenues with tariffs, those would be tariffs 6 times Smoot-Hawley levels. That's got the potential to do enormous damage to the competitiveness of every U.S. exporter, to do huge damage to all kinds of workers who use imported goods in what their businesses produce, to create a downward spiral as much higher prices for everything we import means consumers have less to spend on everything else, create worldwide economic warfare as the rest of the world responds. This is a prescription for the mother of all stagflations.
Stagflation is a not so easily achieved economic condition of stagnant economic growth, no economic growth, combined with high inflation and high unemployment all at the same time. We have not seen stagflation in this country in the 21st century. But Donald Trump is now running to make stagflation great again. Leading off our discussion tonight is Robert Reich, who served as Secretary of Labor under President Bill Clinton. He is a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley and co-founder of Inequality Media. Professor Reich, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know you have much to say about Trump economic policies, but I just want to do a quick back of the envelope sketch here, because I know for some people out there, they're hearing, what? Get rid of the income tax? I'd be better off. And it's like, well, okay, let's say you're making $100,000, you're in the 22% income tax bracket. You're going to have sales taxes on a lot of things that would be up, sales taxes through tariffs in effect, that could approach 20% or above. You could have interest rates on home mortgages that go way up into the double digits, and all sorts of other ways in which you are economically much worse off under this sales tax tariff regime than you would be under an income tax regime. And oh, by the way, when you lose your job because of all of this, your tax bracket actually goes to zero.
Lawrence, we have come to have such low expectations in terms of the coherence and rationality of Donald Trump that these kinds of proposals can very easily get under the radar. People say, well, he's just mouthing off again. The fact of the matter is, this is serious. He doesn't put forth many serious proposals. This one seems to be serious because he does say it in a way that makes you think, well, the income tax, getting rid of the income tax might be a pretty good idea until you actually think about the consequences. In order to have enough revenue from tariffs to match what you would lose by getting rid of the income tax, you would have to have a tariff that was at least in the range of 130 to 140%. Now, this is way beyond Smoot-Hawley. I mean, this takes us onto another planet, because with that kind of a tariff, that's like the largest sales tax you could conceive of. That would bring the economy to not only stagflation, but probably much worse.
Yeah, that $30,000 car you have your eye on becomes a $60,000 car, and there's nothing about having your income tax reduced that makes that more affordable for you. Professor Reich, there's more to the even before he got to this utter madness of let's just finance the government through tariffs. There's so much more about what he's been saying about economic policy that you have been taking apart in your way. Take us through some of that.
Well, I mean, he's talked about exerting control over the Federal Reserve Board, which would basically eliminate the credibility of the Fed in terms of the Fed setting interest rates. He's talked about rounding up 11 million or 15 million people who are in the United States who are undocumented, which would have drastic effects on our labor market, not in a positive way, because we need those people. If you look at what they do and how much revenue they actually bring in, he is talking about reducing taxes on the highest income earners, and we're talking about all sorts of taxes. And what's the effect there? Remember, in his term of office as president, he told us that he would cut the taxes on the rich and on big corporations, and we would all of us, get a $4,000 bonus as it trickled down to everybody else. Well, did you get a bonus? Did anybody you know get a bonus? We could go on and on. This is the most ridiculous. To call it a plan dignifies it.
And that then there's the other elements, which are economic elements. For example, just getting rid of Obamacare. That's an incredible